Right, so Israel's used to getting its own way and woe betide anyone who tries to stop them. But this time, Indonesia have not just blocked their path, they've slammed the door shut and double bolted it for good measure. When Indonesia refused visas to Israeli athletes for the World Gymnastics Championships, it didn't issue a fiery manifesto or wave a boycott banner, it just did the paperwork, calmly and legally, and very completely. And when Israel ran crying to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, "We are being persecuted, we are victims," the judge shrugged and said, "Well, that's sovereignty, deal with it." Ah, someone else's sovereignty being put before theirs. Well, how dare they? For a country that treats international law like a suggestion leaflet, being out-lawyered by the world's largest Muslim democracy was a humiliation they didn't see coming, but it is very much deserved. And the irony of it all is that it wasn't even a protest. It was just formality. The bureaucratic version of a mic drop. The quietest boycott ever in modern sport, but the loudest legal slap Israel's had in some time. And it begs the question that if Indonesia can boycott Israel from a sporting event in light of the genocidal acts it still must answer for, why aren't others doing it as well? Right, so the other day Indonesia did something that most Western institutions have spent more than a year desperately trying to avoid. Its law minister, Yusril Iza Mahendra, announced that Israeli gymnasts would not be issued visas to enter the country for the World Artistic Gymnastics Championships in Jakarta. The statement was confirmed by both the immigration director and by Jakarta's governor as well. The entire Israeli delegation, the athletes, the coaches, the staff, all were excluded before a single flight could even be booked. Indonesia and Israel have no diplomatic relations, it must be said, and Jakarta has repeatedly condemned Israel's assault on Gaza as a genocide. The foreign ministry had said so on record months earlier. The refusal came amid street protests involving thousands who demanded that the government block Israel's participation. Israel's Gymnastics Federation called the decision outrageous. Of course they did. They claimed the sport was being politicised. Well, sport is inherently political, in case they hadn't noticed. Yet the International Gymnastics Federation, or FIG, quietly confirmed that the host nation was acting within its rights. No global rule compels a country to grant visas, and they, as a sporting body, have no say over such matters. There was no boycott declaration, no fiery rhetoric on paper. It was just a visa refusal. But in practice it amounted to a lawful disqualification. Indonesia didn't breach FIG's charter, it followed its own law. And the result was identical to a suspension, yet immune from any form of sanction too. It was coordinated between the Ministries of Justice, Immigration and Sport, a deliberate extension of national foreign policy, therefore. Indonesia's position on Palestine has remained constant ever since independence, solidarity with the colonised and rejection of apartheid systems. So in that lineage, the gymnastics decision was continuity, not a disruption at all. However, all of this was utterly unacceptable to the professional crybabies of the genocidal blue and white state, wasn't it? Because within hours, Israel's Gymnastics Federation filed two urgent appeals at the Court of Arbitration for Sport, or CAS, in Lausanne. The first sought an injunction forcing Indonesia to issue the visas. The second demanded that FIG relocate or cancel the championships. For 3 days, Israeli lawyers pushed emergency motions, briefing sympathetic media that the court might intervene. And then, without ceremony, the CAS published a 2-line decision. It lacked jurisdiction to compel a sovereign state to grant visas or to override its immigration policy. Can you imagine someone trying to override Israeli sovereignty, given how they've weaponized it to commit genocide? For a sporting event, for some gymnastics? Someone else's sovereignty, though, and it's expected. FIG immediately confirmed that it would proceed in Jakarta under Indonesian law as well, so that'll be 2-0 to Indonesia then. But that was it, a legal shutdown delivered in a few sentences. The Israeli side called the verdict a dangerous precedent. Officials warned that world sport would collapse if hosts could act on political grounds. Well, how dare they? But the court's logic was very simple. Sovereignty is not subject to arbitration by a sporting body. Such a notion is patently ridiculous. Indonesia's decision was lawful, final, and immune to appeal. So for Israel, the shock was psychological as much as legal. The institutions it had long trusted to protect its exceptional status had this time enforced the rules as written. They can't have that. The combination of Indonesia's action, FIG's compliance, and CAS's restraint has become known now as the Jakarta model. The model rests on an uncontroversial principle. A sovereign state controls who can cross its borders. Simple as that. Power cannot be challenged by a sports body or by a tribunal designed to resolve contractual disputes to force that issue. In exercising that right, Indonesia turned legality itself into an instrument of accountability. And other governments have noticed as well. Lawmakers in Malaysia and Pakistan and Algeria have publicly praised the decision and discussed adopting similar measures themselves. None of them broke a treaty, none of them broke a federation rule, all operated in the same lawful space. Indonesia's reasoning was perfectly straightforward. The government faced public and parliamentary pressure to respond to Israel's campaign in Gaza. The death toll among civilians, verified by humanitarian agencies and cited by the International Court of Justice in its genocide proceedings, has surpassed tens of thousands. Religious organisations, labour unions, political parties all demanded that Jakarta refuse to host Israeli representatives. But Minister Mahendra's statement was blunt. Indonesia could not, in good conscience, welcome representatives of a state committing atrocities. And the remark reflected majority sentiment in the country. Polling from National Institutes showed more than 3/4 of Indonesians support the ban. So after Kass's ruling, the reaction in Tel Aviv was, well, you can guess, it was furious. The Israeli Gymnastics Federation secretary called the situation heartbreaking. Commentators described it as sporting anti-Semitism because, yeah, of course they did that, didn't they? Yet Indonesia's action had targeted a state delegation, not a faith, not an ethnicity, no matter how many times Israel try and conflate the two. No other team faced restrictions, so the outrage therefore revealed expectation on their part rather than injustice. Global sports institutions too often preach political neutrality. Their own behaviour, however, contradicts that. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, FIFA and UEFA suspended Russian teams within 72 hours. The International Olympic Committee advised the same. The justification was moral. An aggressor state could not be normalised on the sporting field. By that measure, Israel should have been suspended months ago, shouldn't it? Its campaign in Gaza has produced 2 years of civilian casualties on a far greater scale and prompted binding orders from the world's highest court, yet FIFA and UEFA remain silent when it comes to Israel. A recent investigative feature on the issue concluded the difference lies in politics, not in principle. When Western governments condemn an aggressor, these federations are happy to act. When they defend one, the federations go into hiding. Their supposed neutrality is therefore not a rule, but a convenience. FIFA's written statutes make the hypocrisy explicit too. Article 3 commits the organisation to upholding human rights. Article 14 permits suspension for bringing the game into disrepute. Those provisions were cited verbatim when Russia was banned. They remain unused in Israel's case, though. Human Rights Watch documented as early as 2016 that 6 Israeli football clubs based in illegal West Bank settlements play in Israel's league system. That's a violation of FIFA's own territorial rules. That evidence has been ignored for nearly a decade. United Nations human rights experts renewed the call for suspension last month, stating that Israel's conduct in Gaza breached the same principles that were being applied to Russia. FIFA didn't even bother to respond. Meanwhile, public movements fill the vacuum. Under the banner #GameOverIsrael, protests have followed Israel's national team across Europe. Outside a World Cup qualifier in Udine, Italy, just yesterday, thousands demonstrated with banners reading "Show Israel the Red Card." The images were broadcast globally. The message was consistent: apply the same standard to every state. The double standard becomes even sharper when you set it against Indonesia's earlier experience. In 2023, FIFA stripped Jakarta of the Under-20 World Cup because it refused to host Israel. 2 years later, the same federation allows Israel to compete freely while its military campaign is under ICJ scrutiny. The difference is not Indonesia's behaviour, but FIFA's blatant moral elasticity. Israel's participation in global sport has long been part of its diplomatic strategy. Every appearance, every handshake, all reinforces the image of normality, of this being a normal statehood. Exclusion breaks that illusion, but it's like pulling teeth to get it, despite the hypocrisy amongst some sporting bodies that gets exposed. The Jakarta event marks the first time since the 1970s that Israel has been excluded from a world championship. It comes while the ICJ's genocide case remains active, so the optics are unambiguous. A state under legal investigation has been uninvited by a G20 democracy. No public relations effort can disguise that absence. Israel's reputation depends on presence. Jakarta replaced presence with absence and absence with precedent. Western outlets have, of course, given this story minimal attention. Those that have described it as a visa complication if they have covered it. So by contrast, non-Western media framed it as moral defiance through the law, though. That divergence reflects the enduring bias from the West and the non-West. When the West enforces ethics, it's called principle, yet when others do it, it's politics. The Jakarta ruling now stands as a fixed point here. CAS cannot overrule state immigration policy. FIG cannot force compliance. Neither particularly want to either. Israel's exclusion, therefore, remains intact. These outcomes have created a new hierarchy of authority inside sport. The host nation now holds decisive power. So will other nations holding other events that Israel might be wanting to take part in use that power that they now have? Legal scholars have called it a structural shift. The balance has moved from federations onto governments here. Most major tournaments over the next decade will be in non-Western states as it happens, so the implications are immediate and practical. We really could see this repeated. Sports moral geography is changing a bit, and this is effective if more states choose to show it, but it will be on them to do that. Israel's protests after losing at CAS used emotional, almost theatrical language. They spoke of heartbreak, they spoke of discrimination. Yet what happened in Lausanne was routine legality. The law was applied evenly. No exceptions for Israel this time, and they just aren't used to it. For a state accustomed to exemption, equality feels like a punishment to them. That is why Indonesia's calm refusal carried more weight than any condemnation. It forced Israel to experience, however briefly, the accountability it usually gets to evade. The spoilt brat nation got some overdue discipline. Between 1964 and 1992, apartheid South Africa was banned from the Olympics and other competitions because its system violated sport's basic values. The principle was that structural oppression forfeits the right to equal participation. Israel's occupation regime and ongoing siege of Gaza, its apartheid, surely meets the same criteria under international law, yet the federations that once enforced that standard now shy away from it because of who it is. Indonesia's stance revives the older logic that inclusion without accountability is complicity. Global sport remains one of the few arenas where Israel continues to be normalized. Diplomatic isolation can be concealed when the national flag still flies in stadiums. The Jakarta decision cuts through that image. For the first time in years, a world-class event is going ahead without Israeli representation. FIFA's quick punishment of Russia and its ongoing indulgence of Israel exposed the alignment between politics and procedure. The statutes used to suspend Russia still exist. They simply remain unused when it comes to Israel. But if federations are silent, the crowd is not. Protests outside Israeli fixtures have multiplied across Europe. Demonstrators consistently link their actions to sport's previous moral stances, because we all remember them. They remember that Russia was expelled for bombing cities. They remember why South Africa was sanctioned. They ask why Israel is not. The banners and chants form a parallel record of conscience, visible even when institutions avert their eyes. Indonesia's action was not a political stunt. Under the Vienna Convention, border control is sovereign. CAS affirmed that principle. The outcome demonstrates that a host can refuse entry on moral grounds without breaching any sporting contract. This provides a reference case now for all future hosts. It is now established practice. The refusal fits within a documented pattern. South Africa's genocide filing, Brazil's Senate motions, and Chile's suspension of diplomatic ties all express the same determination to enforce morality independently of Western sanction. Indonesia's act joined those measures with legal precision. It turned sympathy into jurisdiction. The entire act was bureaucratic, no speeches, no threats, no slogans, none needed. A minister issued an instruction, an agency followed it, and a court upheld it, and that was it. In that sequence lies the new face of resistance, procedural, quiet, irreversible once written. Israel's federation declared that no future host should be allowed to repeat Indonesia's behaviour. Well, that language is rather telling, isn't it? The demand for a right to exemption remains their subtext. God's chosen people are stamping their feet and demanding to be placed on a pedestal above all others and whining that they're not there already. Yet the precedent now exists instead. The paperwork cannot be undone. Israeli outrage should be treated with the absolute contempt that it deserves. Across the global south, governments are no longer treating Western-led federations as moral arbiters. They're asserting their own standards. The ICJ's provisional rulings, UN experts' statements, and visible public protests have given those governments the legal and political cover they need. Indonesia's move is the first concrete demonstration that they can act without waiting for someone else. And Israel's typical response, mobilizing diplomatic pressure and framing criticism as anti-Semitism, proved absolutely useless here. Immigration law left no room for lobbying. CAS's decision ended the matter before politics could enter the arena. There was no negotiation to exploit, no procedural backdoor. The first time Israel's influence met an immovable process and had no effect on it. Sports governing bodies will continue to claim neutrality, but Jakarta has redefined the term. Neutrality now means hosting events under the law, not ignoring the law. It means treating every nation equally, even when equality offends the powerful. International criminal justice is slow. Moral enforcement through sport can be immediate, though. Jakarta's refusal filled that gap. It didn't punish, it just withheld legitimacy. It didn't convict, it just refused recognition. In a world where impunity thrives on appearances, that's a serious form of accountability. The precedent is now operational. Any future host can point to Jakarta and cite lawful authority. The caste ruling and FIG compliance are public record. Those facts give cover to any state that wishes to replicate this model, the Jakarta model. Federations are cornered between law and politics. Either they apply their own rules consistently, or hosts will continue to impose consistency from below, shaming them as they do so. If they fail to respond, their authority just erodes even further, doesn't it? Jakarta has already shown that world sport can function perfectly well without their intervention. Public protest remains the most visible gauge of legitimacy. When thousands gather outside a stadium to demand equal enforcement, the optics change faster than any committee vote can. Those demonstrations are now part of the moral infrastructure of sport. They remind hosts that they have political cover to act and remind federations that their silence is noticed. The comparison between South Africa's exclusion and Israel's immunity is now unavoidable. Both regimes stand accused of systematic discrimination. One was isolated until it reformed, the other continues to compete. Jakarta forces the question back onto the table. What changed, the crimes or the alliances? Well, the decision did not criminalise or sanction anyone. It did not dictate terms to other hosts. It simply declined to legitimise a state delegation under live investigation for atrocities. That sequence is the precedent. Israel warns that allowing visa refusal sets a dangerous precedent. The precedent is only dangerous to double standards. To prevent arbitrary exclusions, federations must simply apply their statutes equally. Jakarta's act is a symptom of their failure to do so. The International Gymnastics Federation and CAS, by respecting Indonesia's law, have set a new standard of restraint. In doing so, they've exposed FIFA and UEFA's selective enforcement. Athletes and fans can now see the difference between an institution that respects sovereignty and one that hides behind it. Accountability no longer depends on tribunals or lifetime bans. It looks like a government calmly declining to participate in normalization. It looks like a sporting body following host nation law. It looks like a world event proceeding smoothly while a state under genocide proceedings watches from home. Some argue that federations should impose blanket bans. Jakarta proves they don't have to. Host nations can enforce moral limits themselves. The unresolved question is why Russia's actions led to immediate suspension while Israel's bring none. Both conflicts are documented, both violate humanitarian law. If the rules differ, federations should admit it. If they don't, enforcement must be equal. Jakarta has ensured that the question is one that we're going to end up keeping on coming back to. Jakarta's paperwork has become precedent. Other governments are studying it. Somewhere another visa office will soon face the same decision and the same choice to act. If they don't make the right choices, many people will be asking them why that is. It's certainly a question that could be asked of the Norwegian Nobel Peace Prize Committee when they decided to award this year's Peace Prize to a hard-right Venezuelan opposition leader who's called for the US to invade her own country and kisses Israeli backside like the Pakistani president kisses Donald Trump's. Hardly peaceful. So what's the justification other than Trump is bombing fishing boats because he wants to start a war with Nicolas Maduro? Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.